Welcome to Personal Injury Marketing Minute.
Welcome to the Personal Injury Marketing Minute, where we quickly cover the hot topics in the legal marketing world. I'm your host, Lindsey Busfield, the Vice President and Partner over at Optimize My Firm. Today, we are talking with Joy Avila, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and David Chamberlin of James Scott Farrin, the Creative Director and Vice President of Marketing at this fantastic law firm. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of James Scott Farrin, especially if you are in the Carolinas. They're a great personal injury firm, and not just a personal injury firm. You guys have developed some incredible verticals within your existing law firm, and I want to talk about the branding that goes behind branding a vertical when you already have a very established and well-known brand. So that's what we're going to be talking about today as we get into this episode. So thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
And for those of you who are regular listeners and watchers, yes, we have a very different background today. We are actually in studio here at the James Scott Farrin office in downtown Durham. So I'm excited to be in this new space and talking with you guys about everything that you have going on in the branding and marketing world here. So for our listeners, tell us a bit about James Scott Farrin if they are not familiar with it, as well as some of the other brands that you have under this great brand and organization.
So, personal injury law firm. Right now we're in the mothership. This is our home office in Durham, but we are statewide, also located in South Carolina and Georgia under the various brands. Been around since 1997. I like to think of ourselves as market leaders and trendsetters, and we pretty much handle all cases, or many your typical personal injury cases, and we just have an outstanding team and firm, and love what we do.
Yeah. I'll add that we're probably one of the largest personal injury firms, well, definitely one of the largest in North Carolina. And we're almost 300 staff. And then as far as there have been verticals that we've gone after and then not anymore. And then there are some that still exist, which we can talk about. But the ones now are focused primarily, the ones outside of the James Scott Farrin brand are focused on specific practice areas like eminent domain or whistleblower law.
And so with these other practice area brands, you said that they are developed by James Scott Farrin, but are not necessarily using the James Scott Farrin name. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so what informed that decision? Why did you decide to not use this brand that's already kind of a household name?
Yeah, so it really depended on the case type, like Joy said. And so eminent domain being the perfect example. Not something you think about when you've been branded so long as a personal injury law firm. And eminent domain's very nuanced as well. So there's that element of it. And then also with eminent domain, it's a different type of clientele. So we wanted to brand it differently to reach that clientele and not think of like, oh, I'm not going to hire a personal injury law firm to do this, because we literally hired only people with experience in eminent domain. So the whole division, most of the attorneys used to work for the Department of Transportation doing the same work, but actually on the other side. So we recruited them to come here, so they have extensive eminent domain knowledge. So we didn't want to confuse the brands with the audiences that we were going after.
And that's a great point, because when you have created a household name, sometimes that doesn't extend into other types of law, and you don't want to have brand confusion with your target market. And so when you are developing the brand for another vertical here or another practice area that you don't want to have associated, what is your approach to identifying the target market and developing the beginnings of that brand?
I think one of the first things we think about, and this would be something you might appreciate, is whether or not we could get the site to rank, because that's a major pro in keeping things under the same brand, is you're not having to build the same domain authority over and over and over again. But in something like eminent domain, where we can create pages on every single specific project that they might encounter, it's a lot easier to rank then for that content. So that's one of the reasons that's something that we took in a different direction.
That's a good point. Once we had shareholders in the firm that had seen the success with Eminent Domain and building it as a different brand, and then they wanted to take their department and do a whole separate brand, but it didn't make sense because it actually fit perfectly under the James Scott Farrin name. It was a personal injury related department. So to rebrand it, you would have just been competing against yourself, and it just didn't make any sense. So it really is, audience specific. And like Joy said, what's the effort to create a brand and grow it?
Right. And especially where there is relatively low saturation or competition from an SEO perspective, it definitely makes sense to create a new website and be able to get a foothold there. It's not going to take as much effort as it would if you were competing against something that were national projects.
Right. Like to have separate websites for a personal injury and then workers' comp. And so, that would just be a massive undertaking because those are so popular. So, yeah.
Right. And so as you are looking at the target markets for these branding initiatives, there have got to be some similarities, I would think, between personal injury and eminent domain, for example, because a personal injury accident could happen to anybody. And sure, there are certain demographics that would be more likely to hire James Scott Farrin. But when you are looking at eminent domain, how do you begin your research on how to target specific demographics or specific populations for these individual projects that could be impacting your prospective clients?
Well, the work is actually kind of done for us in the sense that we target everybody on a project. So if there's a project that we think we can help clients on, we think we can help clients on almost every project. Some might be a little too small, given the takings and whatnot. But we will try to reach out to everybody on a project that we are going to go after. So it doesn't matter what the demographics are, because they're all in the same situation. They're all losing land, and we're there to try and help them.
Yeah, let's say in general, we try to go for practice areas or brands where it's easy to identify our audience. And in this case, like he's saying, the DOT publishes these plans, and so we can easily go in and look and say that's a potential client, that's a potential client, that's a potential client, and then market specifically to them.
Right. And so then around that, if you see certain patterns, does that impact your messaging for these clients as you're reaching out to them and building your website?
Yeah, I would say the messaging is tailored less to maybe what we consider traditional demographics and more to their situation. So if you are losing your front lawn to an easement, I'm going to send you information about what that's going to do to the value of your home. What are the things that you need to be careful of when you're reading through what you're giving up in your easement rights, things like that. So I would say it's less sort of traditional demographic and more situational types of things.
Yeah, that's right. Because we have much more information from the DOT. We know what's happening to a particular individual's property, so we can be very targeted, like Joy just said.
I would say we do the same in personal injury to a big extent too. While we may do some level of traditional demographics, a lot will be tailored to their specific type of accident. So a motorcycle accident, they're getting certain marketing material from us, a bike accident, things like that.
Absolutely, because those things need to be differentiated. And even though they're all under the same personal injury umbrella, somebody who has been in a motorcycle accident is going to have different questions and a different recovery process, and it's probably going to have some really significant injuries, as opposed to somebody who has been, involved in a slip and fall or a dog bite, which are still very serious injuries, but they're going to need different things and need different support. And then, God forbid, a wrongful death, you're going to have the family member. And that's going to require a different messaging approach than somebody who is directly impacted by an accident. So all of those things need to be thought out and have different strategies behind them.
100%.
And so when you are looking at a project that is more software based? Because I know you guys have been developing a software as well. Does that branding approach change because you are now building a software for other law firms as opposed to building a brand for a consumer?
Yeah, and sorry to have interrupted you. Yeah, that's almost a completely different type of marketing. Instead of B2C and within a specific location, you're now national, you're B2B. I don't know that we would have ever set out to do that if we didn't build it for ourselves and then other people look at it and say, hey, I'd like to buy that. Other firms that we were consulting for. So that was one that sort of found us as opposed to maybe going out and finding.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
That is a whole different animal, and we're going to be doing a second podcast episode all about the development of new verticals and digging more deeply into that software. So stay tuned for the next episode that gets into that. But I would love to hear about maybe some of the branding strategy that goes along, because I know other law firms have had attorneys that are like, man, I have a really great idea for a software that could help. Or now, especially with AI taking a really strong foothold in the legal service market, attorneys who are thinking about building out AI softwares but don't necessarily know, do I brand it as a part of my law firm? Do I brand it as a separate entity? How to go about doing that? So what are some of your thoughts on that?
I think it's a lot harder than you probably realize. I think we learned that firsthand. Granted, vibe coding and all of that may help you out a bit now, but there's still a lot more to be done, I think, than people realize, especially when you're dealing with such secure data. That very much complicates even the build. So, that's what I would say, at least on the technology side. In thinking through approaching other verticals, one of the cases I was thinking about that was maybe interesting, especially to somebody who's just starting out, would be the whistleblower vertical. Because when we first started that, our main thought was we wanted to try to get some whistleblower cases. And we had some people who had a little bit of experience at that point when we first went after it. And so we decided, though, in studying the audience, these are people who are really nervous. They have often, tried to talk to somebody and then gotten fired, and they're really scared. A lot of times they're on the inside of the fraud, and so coming out afterwards, it's a really scary process. So putting them in the same mix as our personal injury clients did not feel right. So instead, we built a website that was specific to them, and it was very process-based, and it was very more emotional language. We're going to hold your hand. We're going to walk you through this. And, we were trying to compete with people who had more experience, I guess, at that, or were at least owning it in search, because that's not something you're competing on as well locally. And so... But in being able to match our language to the client, it did well. And then eventually we were able to partner with a partner who really he was a former U.S. attorney and specialized in whistleblower cases. And so now, we feel like we can back up what we said initially. But
yep, and that's something we had a learning experience with, because I think initially a lot of the content that we put out there was definitely, not personal injury related, but it wasn't as much, like Joy said, process. It wasn't as much like, hey, we're here for you. We're going to keep don't worry about anything. We're going to keep everything in confidence. We're going to protect you. We're going to protect your identity. It wasn't like that at first. And we weren't getting a lot of traction. Once we changed that messaging, things started to improve. So, it is, to try and do that same messaging would have been counter to what everything we say on the Farron side. So again, a separate brand made a lot of sense.
That does make a lot of sense, because even though a personal injury victim is approaching you in a time of crisis, they have an urgency to them. That's a very different crisis and urgency than somebody on the whistleblower side might have, because they are at risk of losing their jobs. They're at risk of losing their reputation, and having that anonymity when they are going into this is a very different level of protection than somebody might need and more so need as an advocate on the personal injury side.
Right. And everything they see, everything you send them has to say that. If you put all that same stuff on, our main brand, the Farron side, they have to navigate through all this other stuff to find that messaging, which is just not going to work.
Right. So definitely separating the two entities makes so much sense in that particular case, even though they might on the surface level seem like they are related. And there's the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. Well, you guys are very much masters of multiple trades. So having the brand reflect that is a very, very important piece and an important one to distinguish yourselves.
Yep.
And so when you have a firm who is looking to either expand into new practice areas or develop these new verticals, what is one last piece of advice that you have for them as they are getting started thinking about, is it the right time? How do I get this messaging? What data do I need to look at to inform these decisions? What should they be looking at before they hit go on launching a new brand?
Well, I think you definitely want to know what the competition, how saturated is the market, how big of an uphill climb is it going to be. Building a brand takes a long time. It is a tedious process, so you got to know that you're going to be in it for the long haul, unless you're just testing something. And then if you're just testing something, you're not going to do a lot of brand building stuff. You're going to do some other things first to see if there is an audience there that you want to go after. But I would recommend, if you're going to start from scratch and you're going to build a brand, I would test first, whether it be market, audience, both. See if there's anything there. Look at the competition, how saturated is the market, and then use that information to inform whether you want to go after it or not. Because it's also, with time, that's also expense. And so it's not cheap either.
Having that proof of concept and making sure that there's that interest in it before you start to heavily invest, because you can have a great idea. And there are a lot of great ideas that should honestly just stay great ideas, because there isn't necessarily a huge market opportunity for it, weighing out the expenses of how much you're going to have to pour into it to get that return on the investment back out. So I think that's a great point.
And not all marketing channels are the same for every brand. So, we use different marketing channels for Whistleblower, for Eminent Domain than we do for Farron. So it really, that also plays into it too. So you can't just, for us, we're heavy TV advertisers, but we couldn't just slap up TV commercials for Eminent Domain. It didn't make sense. So you had to look at different marketing mediums.
That's a great point, because with the eminent domain, and especially when you have the gift of knowing exactly who's impacted by it, you can be so much more targeted in your messaging and your approach to getting the word out that you can actually help someone with that. So very, very good to know the data that you can use to inform your marketing decisions to figure out what's going to lead to the best ROI.
Right.
Yeah, to that point, I would say we probably prioritize areas where we can more easily identify our potential audience. And then to your point about having something, looking at market saturation, my absolute favorite branding diagram, getting really nerdy, is, is on unique selling proposition. And this is really when you're figuring out your messaging and how you want to move forward. But it's the intersection of, what's already out there, what do people want, and then what can you provide that's different? And it's the intersection of those last two that is outside of the scope of what everybody else is providing that's really your sweet spot. And so getting really clear on what it is that we bring that's different and that still aligns with what people want and want, to buy or for you to show up as in some of these, then that's sort of the sweet spot, I think, in figuring out where to go forward in your messaging.
Well, I know that we'll dig into this a little bit more deeply in our next episode, talking about the development of different verticals, but identifying those pain points and making sure that whatever product it is that you're bringing to market is addressing that pain point, because that is what's going to move the sale. So I look forward to our next episode together, talking about the development of different verticals. And I think that's going to wrap up this particular episode of the Personal Injury Marketing Minute. And if you want to learn more about James Scott Farrin, go to their website at
Farron.com.
Farron.com. And feel free to explore some of the other projects that they have been working on as well. And stay tuned, like and subscribe to the Personal Injury Marketing Minute. If you have questions about how to grow your law firm with SEO and other digital marketing initiatives, feel free to look us up at optimizemyfirm.com and reach out to me at Lindsey at optimizemyfirm.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank both of you guys for joining in for this podcast today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.